Well, with today's reading, we have moved to a new portion of the biblical narrative. The people of Israel have been freed from slavery in Egypt. They've journeyed through the wilderness to Mount Sinai, where they were given the Ten Commandments. And then they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land and settled into new life in their new home. At this point, though, the people of Israel didn't have any kings. Instead, they were ruled by judges. And judges are not what we think of as someone on a bench in our court system making rulings. A judge in those days was a charismatic leader, a military leader. And this period of Israel's history is depicted as Israel being in a state of continuous decline where people did whatever was right in their own eyes. That's the setting for the story of Ruth. It's a family story set into the midst of this part of Israel's history. And it's really a contrast to what is going on in Israel at the time. The reading is a microcosm of what it means to live as the people of God. Last week, our reading, we had the Ten Commandments, and then we ended with the great Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Well, this week with Ruth, we get a picture of what it means, what that means as love is put into action. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you, in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were gone? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. What an incredible story of love and grace. It's a story of God's love and grace for an Israelite woman and her foreign daughters-in-law in the midst of famine and tragedy and difficult times. Forced to leave her home in Bethlehem because of a famine, Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their 2 sons head to the country of Moab across the Dead Sea. But sometime after arriving in Moab, Elimelech dies, leaving Naomi and her 2 sons alone. Can you imagine being forced to leave your home because of a famine? Packing up everything you have and leaving most of everything, and then traveling to a foreign country. You see, Naomi and her family are refugees. It's hard enough being refugees, but then she has her husband die, and she's left as a single parent of 2 young boys. But that's not where tragedy ends in the story. The 2 sons marry, but their wives, Orpah and Ruth, are childless. And then after living 10 years in the new country, both sons die, leaving her and her 2 daughters all alone. And you have to remember in that culture that women couldn't work, and a woman without a man to care for her and provide for her was in a pretty desperate situation. Can you imagine the loss and the grief and the barrenness? Where do you go? What do you do? How do you go on with life? And then there's the question of God. Where is God in this whole big mess and tragedy? Where is God in the midst of death and grief and barrenness? Well, Naomi is convinced that God's not there. I mean, and who can argue with her? She's a refugee because of a famine. Her husband has died. Her 2 sons have died, leaving her all alone in a foreign land. But the writer of Ruth has a very different understanding and a very different vision. For the writer of Ruth, God is not the one who brought about the famine or the death of Elimelech or Mahlon or Chilion. Instead, God's the one who is about loving kindness and mercy. God's the one whose loving kindness is operating in the midst of death and grief and barrenness. What I love about this story of Ruth is God's loving kindness and faithfulness isn't some vague, feel-good concept. In Ruth, God's loving kindness takes on flesh and blood in ordinary, everyday life. It's love in action. As Naomi heads back to Bethlehem, her daughters-in-law start back with her. But Naomi tells her daughters-in-law to stay in their own country, marry husbands there, find security. They don't have to go back with her to live in Bethlehem and live in a foreign country and care for her. Well, Orpah stays, but Ruth, in some of the most beautiful words of all of Scripture, says, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." You see, this isn't simply the incredibly loyal daughter-in-law caring for her mother-in-law. This is nothing less than the loving kindness and the presence of God taking flesh in Ruth for the sake of Naomi. It's nothing less than the loving kindness of God walking right beside Naomi and refusing to leave her. It's God present through the love and the faithfulness of Ruth. See, the story of Ruth is a microcosm of what it means to live as people of God, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, and to love your neighbor. The story makes me wonder, what if we lived like this? What if we loved the Lord our God with all our heart, all our soul, all our might? What if we loved our neighbors as ourselves, as Jesus calls us to do? What if we loved with the same love and faithfulness of Ruth? How would our lives be different? How would our actions be different? How would our words be different, and how would the world be different? What would our relationships and our dealings with other people who are different from us look like? And I think of people who are different as skin color or different nationalities or sexual orientation or political views or faith. What if we loved them as people of God? I've been, over the last several years, really kind of bothered and disturbed by a spirit of meanness and violence and hatred and anger that I've seen in our country and world. You know, we disagree with someone, and instead of listening and respecting where they are, we put them down. Or we post disparaging and mean-spirited remarks on social media. You know, we put down those with different political views or those with different views of same-sex marriage or a specific faith tradition or ethnic group or people who think differently from us. Or we make fun of people in very disparaging ways. I'm also disturbed by how we use our faith and our Bible and Jesus as reasons for condemning other people and other groups and actions. And when I hear that stuff, I always want to ask, well, who did Jesus condemn in the Gospels? Because the reality is the only people that Jesus condemned were the self-righteous religious folks. Where's the love and kindness and understanding? Where's love your neighbor as yourself? You see, Ruth paints a very powerful picture that to live as people of God is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, which means love your neighbor. Ruth paints a picture of the loving kindness of God taking flesh in us and our actions for the sake of the other. But before we can love others, and the reason that we do love others is because God's loving kindness has been first given to us. Our love of others is a reflection of God's loving kindness toward us. In just a few minutes, we all will have the joy of witnessing and celebrating the baptism of little Eva K. Beeman, and remembering in the process our own baptism. As Eva's pastor grandmother pours water over her head, and as she makes the sign of the cross on Eva's forehead, it is nothing less than God's loving kindness and unconditional promise to Eva. It's God saying to Eva, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Wherever life takes you, I will go with you. My love will never abandon you, will never leave you. You are my child forever. And it's that loving kindness of God that will empower Eva to live and serve and love all the days of her life until the day when God gathers her to God's very self and she experiences the loving kindness of God in all of its fullness. It may be Ruth's promise to Naomi, but it's also God's promise to Eva and to all of us. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me with you. Amen.